Here we go. Hello, Joanna. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Very good, very good. Well, thank you very much for joining us today on our Blue Earth podcast. I'm super excited to dig into human nature and all of the work that you're doing around the future of your towns and cities, and the built environment is phenomenal. Before we really dig into human nature, I've kind of known you for a long time with our paths crossing in a few different places, and you've got a pretty epic CV. So to kick it all off, I'd love it if you could just kind of introduce yourself and kind of your career up to date and kind of any partners that are involved.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Guy. Well, it's a pleasure to be joining you on this podcast today. It has been quite a journey, but I suppose for me, looking back, my red thread has been always around how we live and the question of how can we make life better, both for ourselves in quality of life, but also in terms of respecting the environmental and social realities that we live within. And so I think, looking back over the years, that journey really started for me in the way I grew up. So I
Okay.
was a child of 1970s good life hippie parents. I literally lived in a forest in Sussex. It was the green life, the good life before it was fashionable. Nature was my playground. I had a really lovely hands-on formative experience with the natural world, but also a kind of tension in myself that I wanted the good things in life. So,
Right.
looking after the ecosystem that supports us was something I kind of felt before I learned about it. But, a bit unlike the good life hippies at the time, I also really liked fashion and travel. And so I wanted my cake and eat it. So that for me, I think, has been one of my kind of themes. And so I suppose for me, both in my own life and in my professional life, it's always been in lots of different manifestations. How can we create a quality of life that's great for us as individuals, that's great for us as a society, and allows us to genuinely thrive? And in order to do that, obviously we're not, even if we wanted to, all going to live semi-off-grid in a Sussex woodland. We've got to mainstream that stuff. And, I've been working in this for quite some time, and unfortunately, it's got worse rather than better. So
Yeah.
the kind of speed and scale of change has got ever more urgent. So that's been, I suppose, my personal mission. And I
Yeah.
started out, studied leadership for sustainability, and I traveled a bit and I got a bit of insight into the fact that we have these common themes, but, we need to kind of relate culturally to people's values, what makes us tick as individuals and as groups, and how we can create kind of the better preconditions for that healthier, better, more sustainable way of life. So I started out as a freelance consultant after my master's, and my focus area was that kind of interface between this kind of the sustainability big meta themes, boiling it down to everyday life, and communications and engagement to kind of join the
Right.
dots. So I started out in corporate consultancy, strategy consultancy, in strategy for sustainability with communications as a theme. I met my now life and business partner, Jonathan, who was one of my first clients, full disclosure here.
Okay.
He was running an amazing project called the Earth Centre. So this was late 90s. And this
Right.
was up in Yorkshire. And the idea was to create a centre of learning, experience, innovation and enterprise around sustainability. Quite punchy back in the day, but ahead of its
Yeah. Yeah.
time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we and the team were working on a 400-acre former coal mine in South Yorkshire to create
Wow.
an international exemplar of sustainable architecture, design, communications, engagement, experience, and enjoyment. Yeah, looking back, it's quite a big
Great.
task.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and we brought together architects, design, some of the really big Atelier 10 expedition, the big engineering groups, architects, designers, innovators, cut their teeth there on this kind of shared project of creating pavilions and exhibitions and conferences and so on around this kind of shared experience of innovation around sustainable design, sustainable living. As that was a big millennium project, and as that kind of needed to move on, we, coming out of that, set up a strategy consultancy called Beyond
Right.
Green.
Yeah.
And the idea was that sorry, it's a long story. I am quite
No, it's
old
good.
though.
It's good. It's all building a picture. I can see how you've ended up where you're going by kind of where
Yes.
you're starting, which is good. But that's good for everyone to
Yeah.
get an understanding of the context, because it is
Yeah.
so important. Yeah.
So now we're in early noughties and
Yeah.
Beyond Green again, a bit ahead of its time. We were a consultancy and we were, strategic advisory, but we were, I think, bringing together a couple of different kind of questions that we put at the heart of our offer. And one was to do with where do we live? So places, communities, homes. So we were working on regeneration projects, community engagement. So things like the city climate strategy for Newcastle
Yeah.
or for Manchester. In those days, they were competing early days to try and become the lowest carbon cities in Europe. The legacy master plan for the 2012 Olympic Games, bringing together all the different stakeholders and communities, this question of the role of this place. And then so that was where should we live? And then we were also looking at how should we live? So that was lifestyles, behavior change, and taking these kind of meta sustainability challenges. People were starting to get kind of aware of and concerned and worried about. There still wasn't very much about how do we relate that to our everyday lives. So alongside the place and the strategy projects, I was working with, for example, FMCG companies. So with P&G, looking at, how to encourage consumers to wash at lower temperatures. Things which are quite mundane in these days every day, but kind of add up to campaigns on how to get people to take the train instead of planes, and lots of different types of kind of communications and engagement projects, again, to kind of boil this down to simplify and amplify sustainability. So I wrote some books, still out there somewhere, very early day books on, sustainability for non-specialists. Sounds
Yeah, I
a long
like
way.
this because and it plays back to that. I like your phrase of effectively you were brought up in that sort of slightly hippie lifestyle in the woods, but you wanted it's an interesting context to say, but I wanted my cake and I wanted to eat it.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
coming in with like the know-how on understanding sustainability from, the hardcore side of things, but also going, well, actually, I resonate with that, but I don't want to, I still want to, I want to get on with human nature and progress and be part of, see the world and benefit from progression, which is such an interesting context. There's not many people who've got that experience and that outlook. So then you can
And I
come
think,
at everything with quite a pragmatic lens.
yeah,
It's
totally.
making a lot of sense.
Pragmatism, both for myself, but also recognizing that, if we have to go outside our niche, we have to make this mainstream. And therefore we have to start with how we live and how many people live and want to live. And, how do we make sustainable living affordable, accessible, and attractive for as many people as possible? That's always been my focus. And it's still what I'm doing today. And that's really been both for me in my career and also in the founding of Human Nature and what we're doing today. That's the drumbeat. So yeah, I carried on doing that. So it was a combination of consulting, quite specialist high level stuff, but also
Yeah.
this simplify and amplify piece,
Yeah.
broadcast media and so on, and was invited to join IKEA. So IKEA, this was in 2013, was at the point of moving from sustainability to being something that was kind of under the bonnet. So materials and supply chain and kind of license to operate and that kind of Scandinavian, very modest, do it and don't talk about it. Certainly not until it, to actually putting it at the heart of the brand and at the heart of the offer and saying, well, actually, maybe we need to adapt our business to not just do what we've been doing for a long time better, but or less bad, but actually to look at, genuine net positive impacts and how to become a regenerative business and how
Yeah.
to use our platform as a business to basically inspire and enable people to live a better life within the limits of the planet. So that was the kind of new vision that we created for kind of coming into the sort of middle of the 21st century. So for me, that was a kind of continuation of my personal mission, if you like, but also seeing that within, a hyper commercial context, but also global. You're working across over 30 markets. you're working with a significant proportion of the consumer population in those markets, and you're looking at the whole value chain. So from the forest and the farm through to the retail experience, through to life at home, and through to circularity. So for me, that was another kind of, I guess, piece of the jigsaw of saying, well, we're fucked if we carry on the trajectory we're on at the moment. You don't need to have a line of PhDs to see that the pathway that we're on is not a good one. But you've also, anything that we do at this stage has got to be pretty dramatic and wholesale. And one of the key components of that is that you've got to make the change mainstream. And to do that, you've got to, from the consumer side of things, make it affordable, attractive and accessible. And then you've got to kind of create the ecosystem around that. So you've got to do two things. You've got to both inspire change. So, you can't, most of us aren't motivated by fear, loathing or guilt. You've got to show people that change is needed, but also that it could be quite, good. There's something in it for them. And then you've got to enable. So you can't just create, fear or an appetite for change. You've also got to have tools to help people to do that. So in IKEA, that was sort of helping people to understand that actually the way that we live every day, our everyday lifestyles, the key components of what we do on a day-to-day basis. So our homes, what we eat, how we get around, the energy we use, all those things actually contribute either to the problems we're facing, be they the climate crisis, nature crisis, social exclusion or so on, or they can also make those things better. So we have those agents of change within our everyday lives. So at IKEA, it was about, helping people to make that connection and then designing the products, the services, the experiences that would help them to weave those into their day-to-day lives. So, for example, shifting to 100% LED lights or starting to sell renewable, so solar installations in our stores for people to have at home, or switching to vegetables instead of meatballs. All those things are like, oh, actually, I can weave this into my everyday life. It does something for me. It's tasty, or it saves me money, or it looks home, or, my kids like it. And it has positive impacts for climate, nature, well-being and society. And together we make more happen. So that for me was amazing. Lived in Sweden.
Have been amazing. What sort of, how long were you there? And were you kind of leading on the comms side of things, or were you kind of implementing sustainability strategies, or a bit of both? I guess what was your role within IKEA?
I was at IKEA for 7 years in total. The first 4 years based here in the UK.
Yeah.
So the UK and Ireland was the first market to kind of take this nascent strategy into practice in a market. So that was, really putting it across the business and then working with consumers and co-workers to kind of make it real, and then starting to innovate around new parts of the business. So home solar, for example, or circularity. And then I moved to Sweden and went into a new global role leading sustainable and healthy living. And that was working across our markets and across all the parts of the business to say, well, to kind of create the new vision for how IKEA could create the biggest possible impact. Positive impact using its platform. So how we set this new mission of inspiring and enabling 1 billion people wasn't a modest target to live a better life in the limits of the planet by 2030. So that was everything. That was products, that was services, that was engagement programs, that was apps, that was getting neighborhoods to think differently. It was really the whole trying to help the whole business to look at its ecosystem of influence, both in its existing business and its products and services, but also how it could evolve into new markets and to work with new customers and work with new partnerships, innovation partnerships, and so on, to really make this swing towards positive impact, playing to its strengths. So playing to new.
And for your that sounds like the dream, just based on kind of what you set out as an ambition on a personal level to try and address that's the dream role.
It was great.
We work at that scale to say we're going to affect 1 billion people. There's not many companies you can go and sign up and say, I'm going to go and do that. And IKEA is so famous, and it's Brilliant that that's kind of where I first knew of you, is look at what IKEA are doing, and they're leading the way, and it was you at the helm leading a lot of those initiatives, which is amazing. And IKEA has just grown from strength to strength as a business, but also known for the impact that it's driving, and the kind of trying to drive behavior change. I think that it's been so well recognized for that.
Well, I'm glad that you say that. I think as Ingvar Kamprad, the IKEA founder, said, one of his many famous sayings, most good things remain to be done. I mean, obviously a journey, and obviously, many flaws and stumbles. And, when you are working across that, at that scale and across that range of markets and so on, yeah, it has its frustrations. But, it was great at that time of change and help to I was bringing my experience from, my past roles and the networks that I worked in, and I suppose that kind of breaking down silos of working across different sectors, actually, to say, well, actually, this is a shared problem. How can we, even an organization as big as IKEA can't do this on our own. We need to work with other brands. We need to work with perhaps product innovators outside our own existing ecosystem. And we also need to be more transparent about it as we go along, because, this idea of humility and humbleness, which is quite Scandinavian, and also this idea of competition, I think it can hold you back, because however ambitious you are and however much resource and brainpower you're throwing at, whether it's climate, whether it's nature, whether it's social exclusion and so on, the scale of the challenges and the pace of the bad change happening, if you like, as such, that you can't do it. No, no single player can do it on their own. And you also can't wait till it's done, and you will fuck up along the way. That is definitely going to happen, because this is systems thing we're talking about. So, having every brand or every product designer or every place designer working just in their lane and working and waiting for perfection, you're not going to get there fast enough. You're just not. And B, actually, we all need to learn with and from each other's mistakes. So that idea of radical transparency was something that, I kind of really learned along the way, the power of that. And so, it was came back to the UK 5 years ago, a bit of a shock to the system. Having Scandinavia is not perfect, but there are components about it that are certainly the future we hope might become more universal. Certainly in terms of sustainable living. Back to Sussex, where I am today, where I grew up, town of Lewes. And behind the scenes, while I've been at IKEA, what we've been doing is we've been basically evolving beyond green from being a consultancy and an advisory to focusing on this really broad range of where we live and how we live, to actually really focus down on, I guess, the art of placemaking. So I suppose, that's, what do we mean by placemaking? Well, it's the way I think of it is the way that we design, we build, and we run places. So not just buildings, but neighborhoods, the ecosystem of our everyday, in order to make sustainable living easy, affordable, attractive, and accessible. And so we were doing that. I mean, I was very arm's length while I was at IKEA. Obviously, I was quite busy, but we were doing that, I guess, in an applied way for landowners and for projects who were wanting to take on this philosophy and take site through planning. And candidly, one of the frustrations is that certainly in the market we're in today, in the UK, and in the 2020s, sustainability is still seen at best as a kind of veneer. To kind of make something less bad and hopefully get it through planning. And, at its worst, it's certainly then was greenwashing, business as usual, to kind of get a green light for getting shite through planning. And both philosophically, personally and professionally, it's just that's not okay. And it was incredibly frustrating. It was a waste of our time. And it was actually, the risk was we were contributing to the problem. So that was kind of, that pathway led us to, about 5 years ago when we'd moved back to Lewes, being in a moment where we were like, well, this is, we really believe that places where we live has this unique power in shaping how we live.
Yeah.
It really creates the conditions to inspire and enable more sustainable living, or it does the opposite. It depresses and disables us from living more sustainably. And in the UK, we have very few examples, almost none of it being done well. And, the system is churning out chod as usual, and we're designing in the problem. So maybe we can't just help other people kind of do the usual business as usual placemaking. What are we going to do? And we moved back to Lewes, my hometown in East Sussex, in the South Down National Park. And there happened to be this site in the town where I'm sitting today, which is a brownfield site by the river. It's been light industry for a good 150 years. It's had ironworks on, it's had mills, it's had factories, and it was identified as a site for development several decades ago. There's a housing need here, like much of the southeast.
Yeah.
And a couple of landowners had, brought it to market and basically proposed, crap as usual. And Lewes, quite a vocal town, quite well informed. So they stood up and said, no, thank you. But they didn't want to be oppositional. They wanted to be propositional. So they formed a group called Phoenix Rising. So the site was the site of the Phoenix Ironworks. Our project now today is called the Phoenix.
Right.
It's quite a nice coincidence, rising from the ashes. So they asked us, because they knew our background, could we give them some advice? Could we help them? Because they were a group of kind of very well-informed and engaged professional citizens, if you like, to think through how Lewes could take this site and create homes and workspaces and social interaction and economic activity that the town and the area needed, but not at the cost of nature, the river, biodiversity, climate, and so on. So
Right.
then they asked us, would we become developer? And I remember getting the call from my husband. I was like, what? In Sweden, we're doing what? So that was the birth of Human Nature.
Okay.
And so, so Human Nature is what I help to run today, Chief Impact Officer. And Human Nature, we call ourselves a campaigning sustainable developer. So we are a developer. We our mission is to create places that make sustainable living affordable, easy, attractive, and accessible and successful. Because I think, like IKEA, there's nothing more powerful than a good example that goes to scale, that people can relate to. They can see the role in the benefit to them and making their own lives better. But they can also see that it is commercial and scalable, because we have to turn the tide really fast in the UK now when it comes to sustainable placemaking. We can't afford, there's no carbon budget left for building badly and for living bad. There's no nature budget.
In a nutshell, I imagine you get the shivers when you go past a traditional new build development that's just banging up 1,000 houses that are all red brick and all look the same, and there's no sort of thought. They're just going, how many can we build? How quickly can we get them up there? And how cheaply can we make it? Am I right in thinking that Human Nature is kind of the total opposite to that, is actually thinking, how can I build a community that's going to value where they live, enjoy where they live, and build it with better materials that are going to be better for everyone at a better price, and just totally kind of rethink the model of saying, well, that's how people are doing it, and no one loves that. You look at these developments going up, and they're just mundane and boring, and there's no real thought that's going into it. And just knowing the experience that you've got with IKEA, the experience that Jonathan has, and the work that you've done on big projects, it all kind of feeds into kind of, I'm glad we went into a good amount of detail into your background, because it's where you started out, growing up, to kind of early stage career points of trying to build massive projects, to going into IKEA and learning how you can affect the lives of billions, and now bring it back to your hometown and going, actually, you have got all the tools to go, I'm going to put my hand up. I can build a better community that's going to serve society and serve the planet.
Yes. Lovely manifesto. Yeah. Please write that down for me. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I don't just shiver. I swear quite often when I go past some of those developments. I mean, I don't want to be too nihilistic about it, but it is evil, and slightly criminal. It's no one's fault, but we have got ourselves to this point where we really are accepting dross in order to meet housing number targets. And we've lost sight, I think, of the outcomes and the impact that places have. And I don't think it's any coincidence that I forget the stats now, but there's when you ask people in the UK if they would like to or even consider living in a new home, the majority say no. Because our experience over recent decades in the UK of house building and volume development has taught us that none of us are stupid. It's shit. Yeah. It's from the built form and these, places that aren't designed to last, places that force you to get into a car, to get to, one of your many jobs, force you to eat unhealthily because there's no access to affordable, healthy food or to spend time outdoors. We force you to be disconnected from and damaging nature, force you to, they force you, whatever you think or care, you might know and care about environmental or social or ecological issues, you might not. But even if you do, these places force you to be part of the problem. So yes, human nature, our job is to turn that on its head and to show that actually what we look at, we look at both the hardware and the software. And again, I think, so what I mean by that is the physical form. So yes, it's the buildings, it's the materials, it's the buildings themselves. Some of them are homes, but it's not just homes. These are mixed use places. It's the infrastructure. So it's what happens outside your front door. It's the streets, the streetscapes, the shared spaces. It's the hardware, so it's the heat and power, water systems. But it's also the software, so it's the services that help you, that you use every day. So, for example, mobility. It's things like co-mobility services, so that you don't need to wang $3,500 a year on a piece of metal sitting in your front drive if you don't want to. You can have access to, the world's best car share co-mobility service. So it's, and it's using bio-based materials.
Yeah.
So, whether it's wood, whether it's hemp, whether it's concrete, for example, so that the built form is not just efficient, but it's, actually bioregenerative. It's really thinking, it's just bringing to like a jigsaw. It's lots of things that are already out there. There's not, there's no flying cars, I'm afraid. Even if we did, even the cars we do have don't fly.
Not yet. I actually think they're coming.
Maybe could. I mean, a Como-copter scheme, not necessarily a bad thing. But it's generally lots of different tried and tested techniques brought together in place. So like you say, so yes, Jonathan and I have both been on this journey for the last 25, 30 more years, working on other people's applied place-based projects at scale. So, at Human Nature, we have a small core team, but we work with a brilliant collective of architects, designers, engineers, mobility planners, soil specialists, and so on, who've all been on this journey as well. And all we do is bring the jigsaw together, and we take brief not from, right, we've got a field, let's see how many units we can get on this. We'll flip the land. We're not taking any interest in the life here because then we're on to the next site.
Yeah.
We actually start with how people live. That's our brief. We work with the local community. And, here at the Phoenix, it took us 5 years to get planning. So we now have planning for 685 homes for mixed use neighbourhood right in the centre of Lewes, which is really exciting. But it took us a long journey to get there.
What were the challenges on that? Why does it?
Gosh.
Yeah.
Well, I'm afraid one of the key challenges is the planning system, or it has been to date, because, well, Lewes isn't our only site, and we'll come on to talk about the others. But where we are in Lewes, where the Phoenix project is, we're in a national park. We're in the South Downs National Park, which is a mixed blessing because it's quite a preservationist mentality. And so, nature is very separate from humans, and there the twain shall meet. So our ideas of actually creating, gentle density where we have more homes in a smaller space that makes it affordable, makes it efficient, by designing out some of the need for parking and so on. where you're using biomaterials to help to build up that local, not just regenerative growing, but also the skills and so on that come to the region. They're thinking about the total carbon footprint. So people, for example, the carbon footprint of living here, not just the materials of the building and not just the operational energy use of the building. That's not something that the UK planning system, well, those aren't a set of things that the UK planning system's very well set up to think about. So we've needed to go with the planning authority on a real, as well as the local community, but I think has been much more proactive to really think about, to take this kind of first approach of, well, what's the role of place? Well, it can be to create better lives. What are better lives? Well, in the 21st century, they need to be lower carbon. They need to be nature regenerative. They need to be connected. We need to be designing in opportunity. How did the place, so it's almost like we've had to run our own mini university on it, frankly.
Yeah.
And it's a lot easier.
The Lewes Council have been on a 5-year course.
Yes,
but
not just
with you and Jonathan.
Authority, the local councils, the local people. Yeah. But I think as a result, the plan is now better. Because, although it's been very painful and very expensive, land is expensive and all the rest of it. So again, you can see why developers do, business as usual, let's call it, to be polite. Because it's, the system respects what's happened before, regardless of what the known outcome is. So, one of the things that just in placemaking, actually, but just in sustainability innovation more generally, is the burden of proof on change is so much greater than business as usual, even though, business as usual is deeply problematic. So as an example, when it comes to places, one of the biggest impacts the place will have is on positive or negative, how you get around, mobility. So the way you or I travel in our day-to-day lives will account for about 26% of our carbon footprint. And more than half of that would typically be through private car travel. So if you're designing a place and you want to reduce carbon, you've got to tackle that. And if you tackle that, you can also really help with cost of living. And you can also really help with air quality. And you can also really help with social inclusion and designing out loneliness. But if you talk to a transport planner, which we spend a lot of time doing, I'm afraid, they don't see that as part of their brief. Their brief is highways, and highways are for cars. And progress needs more cars and bit more roundabouts, which is really expensive. And so you come up with these unintended conflicts in the system. So you get into really bonkers but real scenarios where, because your design depends on modal shift, so people actually are enabled to use their legs to get around and then to access a really high quality co-mobility hub when they need to, because the system says that you need to have X number of parking spaces and you need to have X number of road interchanges just in case you continue to generate ever spiraling road travel. You have to put that money into a pond just in case. So I think hobby horse alert. But I think going back to your question, I think the planning system isn't well set up, or hasn't been well set up, to really think about holistically around placemaking. And so it's kind of designing in a lot of the problems. I think that's probably the key challenge to date. I would say from a finance perspective, obviously we're an SME, so we're taking on, we might have plenty of experience, but we're David and Goliath. And when you're taking on the whole placemaking model, you're taking on the system that is used to huge backed volume house builders churning business as usual with the huge resources to go with it. So if you're coming in with a new model, obviously you need the capacity to make that happen. And I think I don't see it as quite as broad brush as with the planning system, but I do also think that even in the world of impact investment, as I'm starting to experience it, one of the challenges is still siloed thinking. So The whole ethos at the heart of the human nature model is about activating multiple levers of change to create positive impact around climate, around nature, and around human flourishing. So it's not just energy. It's not just biomaterials. It's not just biodiversity net gain. It's not just human health. It's not just social equality. It's all of those. And that's the magic and the art of it. But it is quite difficult when it comes to kind of matchmaking, either with a planning authority or a funding source to find those sweet spots and to which really embrace that holistic thinking. And I think I think anyone working in sustainability, I imagine, would have that challenge. It's certainly ones I've experienced in IKEA and in other commercial places where I've worked. But it's quite crunchy in the placemaking context, I would say.
Definitely. Well, we need people like you to kind of to be the mavericks that are willing to break the system and do things differently. Otherwise, we're just putting plasters on, kind of, over patching over the holes, basically. And we actually need to rethink the system. And I think that's what's coming across here, is that from all of your experience, you're actually going, right, but collectively, I've got the solutions. I understand how we can build a better community and improve how we live. I guess my main sort of question, and I'm quite keen to kind of just understand in very simplistic terms kind of what the business model is. But we at Blue Earth are constantly looking for a few things. One is, our mission is, we are on a mission to transform the way the world works, but we want to work with disruptors in their various industries who are positively disrupting and improving and driving system change. So you're doing exactly that. But the other thing is, instead of complaining about things not moving quick enough, is actually just trying to find the innovators that say, I don't even care what they say, my solution will outcompete theirs. So it will become irrelevant. It's going to happen because we can be more competitive. Are you starting to see that in that kind of, I guess I would position you as being in the built environment space? Are you starting to see that biomaterials aren't just a sort of the eco alternative? The future of mobility isn't just EV for the sake of it. Are you starting to see that these solutions are driving forwards and are now getting into a position where they can outcompete on product and price?
Yes. And of course they have to, despite the odds being stacked against them, as we've set out. And I think that, to your point, when you're in a disruptor role, like most of us are, the power of doing is probably all you've got. And create a superpower, because this isn't about policies, it's about action, and it's about creating enough tangibility so that the success is palpable. And that's just what we have to do. So we do have to outcompete. And I think, so in terms of what our model is at Human Nature, we're at a really, we're very much at a kind of inflection point at the moment, where we're going from project to portfolio. So we've been working for 5 years now on the Phoenix, which is our flagship brownfield site project in Lewes. But through the experience of that, and through, really hearing people say, we've had so many sites brought to us in the last couple of years, which is really exciting. It's very flattering and it's slightly terrifying. On the back of, we haven't broken ground yet on the Phoenix, but I think it has generated this real conversation across the sector about the problem and what different could and should look like. So we've had lots of sites being brought to us by landowners, by local authorities and so on. And we've identified 3 kind of pain points, if you like, or opportunity areas where we're now going to take this learning into different typologies. So we have the urban brownfield neighbourhood model, like the Phoenix. So a neighbourhood within an existing town. And we also have a rural typology. So we have another site, also in East Sussex, smaller, 63 hectares. It's a farm. And the project there, it's called Horham Manor, is creating about 200 homes. So it's smaller, and it's on the edge of a village. So like, many villages in UK, it's lost its it doesn't have enough critical mass to have social infrastructure, to have, food, jobs, mobility, and so on. So it's creating that critical mass. It's really dialing up on the biomaterials, and it's also designing in intensive horticulture, education and enterprise into the model. So with Horham Manor, it's a rural typology, either for an existing village or for similar small rural clusters. And with that, the goal is to go to planning within the next year and go take that to about 15 sites across the UK in the next 5 years. So that's typology 1 is the urban brownfield neighbourhood. Typology 2 is the rural cluster. And then typology 3 is much larger. That's a new settlement.
Okay.
That is, for sites where there isn't any significant human settlement yet, but where there's an opportunity to really lean into the housing need and create somewhere new that's kind of built literally, well, they're all built from the ground up, but really find that whole big ecosystem around sustainable living. So we've got a site for that in the east of England between Norwich and Cambridge. So those are those 3 scales. So we create an SPV, a special purpose vehicle for each site, but we obviously have sort of common IP networks and ways of working that we can deploy across those. And then we have a topco that sits within.
Yeah.
And then we're also setting up partnerships is absolutely essential across this whole piece, as is kind of scaling up the whole value chain. So we're in the process of setting up something called the Natural Buildings Group, because one of the kind of critical limiting factors for us and any other developer in this market who wants to kind of go pace and scale on this agenda, particularly around bio-based materials, is that we don't really have yet a very joined up value chain from the materials, whether it's timber or other biomaterials, the skills, the labour, right through to things like the insurances, all the things that you need to make that stuff happen fast. So we've got a fantastic partner, Scottish-based. So 90% of homes in Scotland are built from wood. So it's not actually innovative. It's really, they're really good at it. They just need to bring it south of the border. So we're partnering with them and a number of other really ace organisations to create, if you like, this plug and play approach to bio-based buildings and the Natural Buildings Group. And then we're having a kind of similar approach when it comes to other bits of the software that we can plug and play into our projects and potentially other sites. So heat and power and co-mobility and hospitality are the 3 there. So yeah, it's so I need to draw it on a whiteboard for myself quite often, but effectively we have the human nature topco, which is where the kind of IP and the relationships sit. We have 3 typologies at different scales: rural, town, neighbourhood, new settlement. And then we have sites that either we find or are brought to us. Each has an SPV. And then we have the Natural Buildings Group and other sort of venture enterprises that service each of the projects.
Fantastic. So, I think you mentioned earlier on that 5 years ago you were leaving Sweden and you were talking about becoming a developer. But hearing you speak now, you've learned and understood that whole process and kind of been able to bring your solutions together. And now you've kind of putting that patchwork quilt together to develop out these different typologies, which is super exciting. And I think it feels like like you mentioned, you're at that inflection point. So what does funding something like this take? Because I imagine that is kind of, you can have the best ideas and the best will in the world, but getting this from a idea on a piece of paper into feet. Well, what is it? You said it earlier.
Yeah, spade in the ground.
Spade in the ground. That's the one.
Spade in the ground. Yeah, no.
People lost it with my mind. But how do you get...
I carry with me at all times so I can say, yes, we've got spades in the ground.
Spade in the ground, exactly. So let's talk to me about the sort of funding to date and kind of how you're approaching it from a kind of topco and then a project basis, and where we're going with that.
Yeah, well, so we've been going 5 years now, and a lot of it has been self-funded, blood, sweat and tears of our own resources, as is probably always the case. We've been very lucky with the Phoenix to date in that we managed to pull together a consortium of local high net worth family office impact investors who all had an interest in the place itself and also the impact that we were wanting to create. And I imagine that's going to be a theme for us going forward, because there is that kind of impact-based passion that needs to spark these projects.
Yeah.
And then, when you get to the point of planning, obviously, that you get a lot of extra zeros on these
Mm.
projects.
Yeah.
So we're now with the Phoenix in advanced discussions with an institutional investor to kind of take on that project alongside some public finance. So it's kind of private partnership model to kind of scale up now and take this project through many spades, diggers, and onwards. And I think that trajectory probably on the certainly large projects is quite likely to continue. On Horham, which is our rural
Yeah.
project we have nearby, that's earlier stage. We're in the process of acquiring the land at the moment, and that should be a much quicker process than it's been at the Phoenix. It's a smaller and simpler site. So we
Right.
see that 1 to 3 years to go to planning. So we have, again, an institutional partner for that, and we are
Yeah.
looking for some additional funding to join us to take this project to planning. So in other words, for sort of a 1 to 3 year period.
And just to jump in there very quickly on where am I right in think so traditional property developing, there's multiple places where an investor can get in and out, in the sense
Yes.
that when you come into a project, like you just said, you'll raise some money to acquire a piece of land. Once you've
Yep.
then got that piece of land, you go to planning.
Yeah.
Once you got planning approved, which I imagine you've got loads of experience now having been through the process, the value of the land's gone up. So there's an opportunity potentially to get investors in and out. And then you've got the
Yep.
next phase, which is actually spade in the ground, building it. And then the
Yep.
final phase, which is it's built, the value's there, we've sold the properties.
Yes.
So
Yes.
that, a lot of the businesses that we get on here are more traditional tech companies, or they're food companies. And that level of liquidity for an investor is not often as apparent. And that multiple kind of point at which an investment can go up is harder to come by. So have I got that right?
Yes, you have. You have. Yeah, like you, I'm still trying to get my head around it, and I think it's definitely no one size fits all on this ladder. But yes, broadly speaking, it's we've got a platform now of IP and processes, methodologies, and partners, but it's still about site finding. You need to come up with a concept for that site that's going to make it worthwhile, and then you've got to come up with plans for it. To get it to the point of planning, get it through planning. And then, that's the first exit, really. And then, yes, you can either stay in through to, because obviously the value appreciation goes up over time, but there's sort of, different levels of risk or perceived risk at each point, obviously. So, some funders see planning risk as too high. They don't want to get involved. Others see it as an opportunity, because that is a big opportunity to jump up, as you say, the value of that land and then exit. So the investor conversations that we're having at the moment for Horham Manor are with the institutional investor partner. I mean, one of I think the exciting things about that relationship is that they are very impact driven. And this is a new type of opportunity for them. So they want to stay in throughout. They want to keep their investment in throughout that project through to sale. But obviously others could stay in or exit. And then they're also attracted to the opportunity to scale this model. So the rural housing model. As I said, we already, because we're getting a sort of site flow coming to us. We can see, with appropriate preconditions, it's quite reasonable to assume that we should be able to get to a point of 15 or so in the next 5 years. So you've got the special purposes vehicle for the site itself, and opportunities to come in and stay in at different stages of that. But you've also got the opportunity to kind of come in and come on the journey, not just of that site, but to scale that up across a number of different sites. And that's the same for the town neighbourhoods and for the new settlements. But obviously those are bigger projects, and therefore the timescales are longer. There's a sort of exponentially more factors outside your control, but it all, it's an ecosystem as a business. So it all feeds back into it. And then you've got Topco at the top. So there's also, we are also in the background doing a raise for a group funding, because obviously the more that we're able to kind of capture and scale the learnings as we go along. Bigger the
Okay. Well,
flywheel, using wind energies here.
yeah. No, that makes a huge amount of sense. So you've got the top co that's kind of owning the IP and has the idea
Yes.
of how you can build better places, and then you've got individual SPVs for different communities that you're effectively going to build. And I imagine one of the biggest challenges for a property developer, and this is me totally imagining stuff, but is finding the new sites. But if the new sites are finding you, that's definitely one tick in the box to say
Yeah,
we've got
weirdly enough,
abundance
that's
of
not our
opportunity.
problem at the moment. We've got more, yeah. I mean, of course, that some of them might be absolute stinkers, and that's why they haven't got anything on them yet. Site flow is not our challenge,
Yeah.
and that's quite
Okay.
an unusual. That's if nothing else, that's something that we created during this adventure of the last 5 years. Is the kind of the reputation that we are. We're coming with something new, serious, and different to the market that's worth looking at.
Brilliant. Okay. And then I guess the bit that must get you super excited and feels like it's taking forever, but that's just the joy of building our own businesses, is that idea of getting beyond spade in the ground and seeing a community flourish. And once you've got that community going, then I guess that proves assumptions, and that really does open up the world to say that actually
Yeah.
I said there was a better way of living. I've now proved it and it
I think
works.
you're right. Yeah. I think that's the tipping point. And it does annoy me sometimes that, we have this assumption. Well, I'm not going to say it's just a British thing, but I think it's a bit British that, oh, well, just because it works somewhere else, that doesn't mean it's going to work here. As I said, earlier, this is, we're not talking space travel here. We
Yeah.
are talking. We're talking about aggregating and deploying really tried and tested methods and approaches to place here, but with a British twist. And I do think there's something where when everything is still seen as conceptual, the burden of proof and the and the spreadsheets and the policies take, of course they always carry weight, but that's all people have in their mind's eye. I think there is it's one of the reasons that I so love working in place actually is it's ultimately completely experiential. And I just think when we get to the point where like, oh yeah, my granny really likes that, or I'm, actually that's where I want to go and hang out this weekend because it's cool, or it just, it does what it needs to for me. And I can't quite explain why, but I just love it. Then then that does so much of the job for you. So I think we're still, on the upward curve to that. And I'm hoping that that's a big inflection point too.
Definitely. Well, not to overly simplify what you're doing, because there's a hell of a lot of experience in there, but it really feels as though as a developer, it's just properly thinking about what the future looks like and what needs to serve society, serve the planet, and putting that together rather than just being like, there's a site, I can make loads of money, I'm going to do what's the quickest route to getting this site developed and moving on to the next, which I imagine is the kind of the most normal way of thinking on these sites.
Yes,
just a little bit of thinking will go a long way and create much better outcomes for the long term, which will improve well-being for everyone forever.
You're right. And that's why, it's very simple, but the kind of heading that we tend to deploy under now is just this question, how shall we live? Yes, of course, it's about which materials should we use, or, how many road junctions do we really need? But those are just means to an end.
Yeah.
And the end is, how do you want to live? What do you want life to be like? And what do you want the impacts of that life to be? That's the brief. Okay. How do we design in a way that will enable that?
Yeah. I think we're going to wrap it up there on human nature, because we've got a really good kind of overview of where this has come from. I love your story, and I only really knew your story about going back to about as far as IKEA. So I've been missing a lot of it. So to understand where this has come from is brilliant, and to know how much experience and kind of lived experience has gone into this is incredible. And then you've obviously been on a hell of a journey over the last 5 years, kind of working it out and leading with there's a better way. And kind of, I think that's always nice when you have that maverick mentality of, I just know it's better and I'm willing to bash the doors down on it. It sounds like there's a lot of door bashing that's being done, and you've now kind of broken through. You've got these opportunities coming to you, and it's a case of kind of getting the finance to kind of push it over the line and make it happen. So from our perspective, we talk about working with organizations that are going to transform the way the world works. there's no doubt that you're going to transform the way people live and the way that we build houses. And it's very exciting to be playing our bit to support that. And we've already introduced you to a few people in our network, but we haven't even scratched the surface. I'm excited about where this can go from here. But yeah, to finish on someone else, I'm always interested in behind any founder, there's plenty of inspiration, and you've obviously had a career that's been in lots of different places. I just wondered if there was a business or a person or a founder, someone that's kind of been within your world that really inspires you.
Yeah, very good question. I mean, perhaps it's an obvious answer, and he is no longer with us, actually. But I think Ingvar Kamprad, who founded IKEA 80 or so years ago, he was there when I started working.
Yeah.
He was, obviously quite maverick, but his vision when he created IKEA wasn't to sell tea lights or Billy bookcases. It was to create a better everyday life for the many people, which is a bit of Swinglish, meaning, as many people as possible. That was 80 years ago.
Yeah.
He's like, well, what I want to do is create a better everyday life for the many people, and I'm going to find a way of doing that. And I'm in southern Sweden where, resources are scarce and people have to look after each other. So what does that mean in terms of a business? And kind of evolved into, okay, well, life at home, has a role. And at the moment, we don't design our homes in ways that are enjoyable or free people's time up or use resources. And lo and behold, 80 years later, it's, one of the world's biggest and most successful companies. But firstly, that founding vision and holding on to that North Star throughout that journey. And, when I was at IKEA, I had 170,000 colleagues. And I know there are many more, even 5 years later. That is absolutely at the heart of the business. I mean, it is written, he's got all these quotes written on all the walls of the meeting rooms, which might be a little bit cheesy, but, it's verging on sect sometimes. Just this, this absolute laser focus on the North Star. What are we here for as business?
Yeah.
Because our, role, what are we trying to fix or make better for people? And then you just constantly steer around that. And, it's all the bangers of, most good things remain to be done. And we learn through our mistakes and, just really humble but focused, outcomes oriented, the democratizing design. I mean, just kind of hard to think of anyone perhaps in business with quite that impact. Well, certainly no one I've had so much exposure to and really witnessed that both as a consumer. I didn't know IKEA's story really before I started there, and as a member of staff and as a sustainability leader, and subsequently actually, coming back since being back in the UK, I've worked in, I take on advisory work, and I've worked in other, I've worked in PLC boardrooms and so on. And goodness me, IKEA, and the work that Ingvar Kamprad founded all those years ago is, I think, quietly, absolutely, fundamentally game-changing of how we see the world and how we run business. So, hard to beat. The other one might be Anne Hidalgo, Mayor of Paris.
Okay.
And, just, I don't know if you've been to Paris recently, but I was there recently and hadn't been for a while. And again, just, getting from A to B, train station to train station with my daughter, and just experiencing the difference in the last few years of the experience of being in the city and green, really abundant greenery as being part of the everyday experience of the city, and cycleways and walking, and that feeling of going from, grime to celebration in just a few years, and, really taking, it's fundamentally about, addressing the urban heat island effect. But the lived experience of a casual visitor there, I don't know.
I've been recently. It's a standout city that's just brimming with culture, and now they've got those bits sorted. It is.
They really layered it on. So those are two different ways who I inspire and affect me.
Brilliant. Well, I can see that. I can see how both play a big role in what you're doing, and massive hats off to both you and Jonathan for everything you're doing with human nature. The world needs people like you doing what you're doing and having that maverick mentality. And I have no doubt that you're going to push on and go all the way. And it's exciting from a Blue Earth perspective to be playing a part in that journey and supporting where we can. So thank you very much for joining me here today. That's been a fascinating conversation, as I knew it would be, and I'm looking forward to catching up with you very soon.
Oh, me too. Yeah, very much looking forward to that and to continuing collaborating with Blue Earth and all your network.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Joanna.
See you soon.
Bye.